Hello, good evening. My name's Paul Sugarman, and I'm the founder of the Instant Shakespeare Company. And tonight I want to talk to you a little bit about the first folio. By the first folio, I'm of course referring to Shakespeare's first folio, which is a really essential tool in working on Shakespeare. And I just also want to talk about that a little bit, to talk a little bit about the Instant Shakespeare Company, and just to have this online as a reference so that if people can want to know more about the first folio, they can do that. The first folio, let me start with the first time I ever saw the first folio was in my library. And when I was growing up in the Bennington Public Library, they had a copy of this, the Norton facsimile of the first folio of Shakespeare. And as you can see, this is a big book because what they did was they produced it at the actual size of the folio pages, which was very large. So I just, this is really the title page. I mean, we call it the first folio now, but it was really Mr. William Shakespeare, Comedies, Histories, and Tragedies, published according to the true original copies. Now, now the first folio is important for a vast number of reasons. The most significant one of which is that we would not have half of Shakespeare's plays if this hadn't been published. This is a very special year for the first folio because the folio was first published in 1623 and we're in 2023. So this is the 400th year anniversary of the publication of this work. Now, there's a lot of things that are really sort of remarkable and interesting about it. One of them was that Shakespeare had nothing to do with the publication of this because it was published in 1623 by members of his company, Hemmings and Condell, who had been sharers with him in the King's Men, and they had all of these scripts. And so they wanted to preserve them in some way, and because one of the things of the plays in the first folio has 36 plays, and 18 of them, fully half of those plays, had never been published before. So if there hadn't been a first folio, if they hadn't been collected in this way, they would have just been lost. And actually, these are there's a lot of different tangents to go off on, but I just want to try and stay focused on the importance of the first folio. For one thing, I mean, a folio, as you see from it being a big substantial book, was something that usually wasn't done with plays at that point. They were published in much smaller versions, quartos or octavos, that were, I mean, like half the size, basically, or approximately. And so it was actually Shakespeare's friend and rival, Ben Jonson, who was probably pretty crucial in this happening. First, because in 1616, Ben Jonson decided my plays should be in a folio. So he put together and had published a folio of Ben Jonson, of his plays, and I believe it also includes some of his poetry as well, and a lot of other things. And I mean, and after he published it in 1616, he went around the country and told people about it. In fact, one of the sort of apocryphal stories that has grown up about Shakespeare is that Ben Jonson came to visit him to show him a folio and to talk about it, and they went out drinking, and then after they went out drinking, Shakespeare got ill and then died very shortly afterwards, because this was published in 1616. Now, this is probably not true because it was not reported anytime during like Ben Jonson's lifetime, or it was first reported in Brief Lives by John Aubrey, like over 100 years later. So, but in any ways, what Johnson really did was he sort of said, "Hey, look, plays are worthy of this sort of recognition," and which I mean, it was an act of chutzpah, but I think it was great. I mean, because I think that it's very unlikely that they would have, that Hemmings and Condell would have sort of, it's like, I think a lot of their reaction was sort of like, what? If Johnson's got a folio, we should have a folio of Shakespeare's plays. They're so much better than Johnson's, you know, which is, I mean, basically, well, I mean, they're so much better than everybody's. You know, Ben Jonson wrote some really terrific plays, but there's only one Shakespeare. And of course, like this picture, this very famous image of him, which we get to see everywhere because it was used for the first folio, and so is clearly in the public domain, was by Martin Droeshout, and we don't believe he ever saw Shakespeare during his lifetime. You know, I mean, but. We do have actually the very first folio. I mean, in the very first page of the folio. Actually, on this, it's actually a spread in which you see, "To the reader, this figure that thou hearest ceased put, it was for gentle Shakespeare cut. Wherein the graver had," I should actually, sorry, I'm going to try it again in original pronunciation because then maybe we'll get some rhymes. "To the reader, this figure that thou here seest put, it was for gentle Shakespeare cut, wherein the graver had a strife with nature to o'erdo the life. Oh, could he but have drawn his wit as well in brass as he hath hit his face, the print would then surpass all that was ever writ in brass. But since he cannot, reader, look, not on his picture, but his book." B, and it looks like BI, but that's actually BJ for Ben Jonson, because that's one of the other confusions why it can be intimidating if you encounter the folio today, is that there's just, there's a lot of sort of printing practices that have changed over the time. So that, like, as I say, when I first saw this, I was, when I was a kid, before I was really studying Shakespeare, just saw it in the library and saw all these sort of weird printing and weird spellings of things. I was like, wow, this is Shakespeare? Yeesh, seems scary. But I was then to learn what a treasure trove of information the first folio is. So, I mean, I think that it's just, there have been many ones over the years. There's actually, this is from the first Norton, first edition of the Norton facsimile of the first folio. They have since brought out a newer edition with a new updated intro. You can't really update the plays too much, or you shouldn't. I mean, so please don't. But they are. But the folio was very significant just from the fact that, okay, it's this collection of these plays, and we get 18 plays that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise, and as they were ones. One of the things why some of his plays were published earlier in his career was because they needed the money, basically, and some of them were published without his permission, although we do believe some of them were published with his permission. But one of the things that, one of the reasons that there was a whole flurry of publication of quartos around 1599, 1598, 1599. And I think one of the reasons for that was that it was part of when they were raising the money so that the Lord Chamberlain's men could move the theatre. It was called the theatre, where it was up in the north part of London, down the Thames, and rebuild it as the Globe. I mean, because this was a very, very crazy and wild undertaking, and a really interesting story that can get into it at some other point. But so that then after they were established, and after they were the William Shakespeare was a sharer when it was the Lord Chamberlain's men, which was when it was under Queen Elizabeth, and the Lord Chamberlain was Lord Burleigh, who was, I mean, basically the person running the country, really. And so it was very good that they were the Lord Chamberlain's men. And then when, after Elizabeth died and James came in as king, then they became the king's men, because it was also pretty much the royal family wanted to control all of the company, because they're also, the queen had her own company, and other things like that. But anyway, so the the king's men, they were the king's men, you know. So that's kind of like they were the hot company, and so they didn't Shakespeare didn't need to publish the plays in quarto. So a lot of the later plays, like the list is just really amazing. Even Julius Caesar was not published in quarto. It was not published till the first folio. Even though it's interesting to see some early plays such as Comedy of Errors that was not published until the folio. But there are just so many of the really great plays plays that I love in particular, like The Tempest, As You Like It, Antony and Cleopatra, Twelfth Night, Macbeth. Were not published until the first folio. So the first folio was really really terrific in terms of just because it kept all of those plays. And I mean, yeah, as I say, there were 18 of the 36 in the first folio, 18 are there. Okay, now just to take a brief side note to talk about the Instant Shakespeare Company. Our motto is Shakespeare for Everyone. And actually, this is now our 24th season of doing annual readings of all of Shakespeare's plays. We've read all of Shakespeare's plays every year for 23 years, and now we're in our 24th year. How we do this is we invite anybody who wants to read. And some people come and they read and they keep reading. Some people read and then they have other things to do. But anyways, so we do readings of all of the plays, and the way we organize them is that we have people designated as playmasters, which is actually some terminology that I've heard from people who are talking about trying to get in touch with some original practices, and because they didn't have a director in Shakespeare's time. I mean, they had people telling people what to do, and Shakespeare probably was, as a member of the company and an actor, we don't have any sort of direct documentary evidence of what he did. I mean, there's some plays supposedly having him as a character, but it's nothing to really know how involved he was. And actually, Hemmings and Condell, who were the people who put together the first folio, how involved they might have been in it. And so what we do know is that they had a very short rehearsal period. And so that because one of the few ways that we get information, what we know about Shakespeare's theater, so much of it comes from this one book, Philip Henslow's Diary, which is really just sort of a record of all of the plays that they performed. There were a few plays that Shakespeare may have been that are listed in there because they performed at the Rose for a little while when they didn't have a place to go, but mostly they had their own place, and that was the Globe, and Philip Henslow's place was the Rose, and so it's for the Rose that we have these records, and we have the sense of it's like they would do so many different plays. How could they? How I mean, how could they be rehearsing? Like, how could you conceivably be doing like 20 plays in a month? And I mean, what a lot of the work that's been done from a lot of people who've sort of realized there's a lot of clues in the first folio, and so that from that came the idea of the instant Shakespeare Company, where we would read a play without any rehearsal, just sort of dive into it and trust the text and see where the text takes us. And doesn't always work. Sometimes people really have trouble with it, but we also have sometimes where it works really well. We've had, I mean, I would say most of the readings are very good, and there's a lot of really good work in them. And I think part of the reason why I started it in the very beginning was when I was working. Okay, I digress. I will digress again now in terms of some history of the publication of the first folio, with some notes on the big folio proponents of the time, Patrick Tucker and Neil Freeman. So anyway, so this first folio of Shakespeare, Norton had published this in 1968, but by basically the 90s, I mean, they had lost. They had run out of copies of it, and there was a demand for the folio because of the teachings of two teachers in principle, Patrick Tucker, and with his original Shakespeare Company, and he was teaching in New York. He was doing a lot of things and was brought there by Doug Mostyn of the Drama Project, and so. When was this done? Oh, yes, this was the 90s. So, wow, because this was so in the 90s that that it was out of print, and they kept saying, "Oh yes, we're going to reprint it. We're going to reprint it," but they didn't. And why was there demand for it? Okay, Patrick Tucker and Neil Freeman. Patrick Tucker has a book, Secrets of Acting Shakespeare. Which goes into depth to all of the sorts of things that he feels that are clues that you can get from working from the first folio, and I think he's right on with a lot of stuff, and there's so much there, but how I found out about the folio was through Neil Freeman. Neil Freeman. Is just a tremendous teacher and writer and actor and enthusiast for the folio. As I say, I mean, from first seeing the folio as a young kid and being sort of scared by it, in 1988 I was doing the summer program at Shakespeare and Company, where they were doing As You Like It and Love's Labor's Lost, and we had one seminar where Neil Freeman came to sort of talk about the first folio and the clues that are there. And with As You Like It, I mean, one of the great examples of the clues, and one of the things that we think, okay, yes, Shakespeare wrote this, but one of the things that we may not be as aware of is how edited most of the versions that we get are. I mean, and there's, it's all done out of a way to try and make the text clearer, because in the folio, it was done in 1623. This was still like a century before we really had like the idea of fixed spellings of things, so things would spell all over the place, which can be quite confusing. But I don't think people realize how much has changed to make it look more like the sort of text we see nowadays. And that's I think in a lot of ways it's kind of like dumbing Shakespeare down to our level as opposed to trying to get into what working, encountering the text on his level, which I think we can do with the Folio. So in any event, he was talking about Orlando's first speech, and the fact that in the first folio, this 30-line speech is 3 sentences. It's just 3 sentences. The first sentence goes on for like 20 lines. In like just about every modern edition, edited edition, it's like 10 to 12 sentences. And I've seen it in a lot of productions where if you break it down that way, it becomes very much a nostalgic thing as he's talking. As I remember, Adam, it was upon this fashion, bequeathed me by will, but poureth, and if you, where you're taking these breaks, but when you have this sort of clue that it's like, what's going on here? What's really going on with this character is that Orlando, when it begins, he's in such a state. I mean, his brother comes on in a few pages and Orlando attacks him, So this is not something that he is doing in a sort of like, oh, just thinking back in a reverie way. He's really actively engaged in him. He's been probably talking to Adam about this for an age, about like all of this stuff, that it's so unfair and so blah 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 blah, and it just comes out, and it's like that sort of a clue that you have when you have, it's like, okay, there are less sentences. There's something going on, and when the Peter Whitrock, who was the Orlando, when we did it, when I was at Shakespeare and Company in 1988, was really terrific, and he just started it off with just such a bang, which is what it should be, because some other, As You Like It is a wonderful play, but it can get really messed up badly. Case in point, Kenneth Branagh's movie. It's one of the things that Kenneth Branagh has made some great Shakespeare movies. Henry V, I think it was a tremendous movie. He's done so much in terms of really making Shakespeare, alive and accessible to so many people. But I think he kind of has a little blind spot in terms of the comic characters, because when in the introduction to his Much Ado About Nothing, he talks about Dogberry. And I know all about, and talks about Dogberry and Touchstone as Shakespeare's unfunny clowns. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. They can be really funny. It's really tough because the language and the jokes are 4 centuries old, and humor is a much more difficult thing to do, but you can still make it work. But anyway, so we had a terrific Touchstone Dan Moran in that production, and it can be a very dynamic play, but there's but anyways, and I think that what Neil Freeman was there is just to sort of give us a taste of its ideas, like, okay, well, if you look at the folio, there are these clues. There are these clues that can help you understand it better. And I think I will at some other point go into more depth at that, use some specific examples, because there's the spelling. The punctuation is great, but the spelling is also, although it can be tricky, because I have a suit unto your lordship, there's always an E at the end. So people say, I have a suite unto your lordship, which is, they didn't have hotel suites back then. It was just, they had liked E's, and they put E's at the end of things a lot. So, but there was also spelling a lot of times in the folio, especially with like the characters that are speaking in vernacular, that is is how it's spelled. I mean, like with Sir Hugh in Merry Wives of Windsor, when he's talking about brains, it's prains. I mean, it's written with a P. So there's the great thing with spelling. But also, one of the things that I've found in our Instant Shakespeare Company readings, where we're reading them without rehearsing, just diving into the text, is the capitalization. And this is one of the things that gets totally changed in modern editions, but is a real wonderful clue, because what, for example, I mean, talking about Julius Caesar in Brutus's speech, not Brutus's speech, Mark Antony's speech about Brutus. One of the things that's really great is if you look at the capitalizations, especially when he hits honorable. The honorable is like it's capitalized throughout, and you don't want to always like hit things in the same way, but just the fact of keep emphasizing it really helps to make the point that no, they're not honorable, and that's what he's doing. And there's other sorts of many other kinds of rhetorical devices, because I mean, I think that one of the other great dangers in thinking about Shakespeare is that it exists on the page. Where I mean, the page is a record of it, but it exists being spoken aloud, and these are clues that can help you get a better handle on that. So I just wanted to talk about that's how I got into it. So after I'd been at Shakespeare and Company, and even I mean in just that little exposure to Neil Freeman and his work got me really interested in that. That when I was working at Applause Books, and Doug Mawston came in with this idea of it's like we should publish a version of the first folio. I was all behind it, and we did it in 1995. I'm sorry, this is rather my working copy, but beat up copy of the first folio of Shakespeare, which was put together by Doug Mawston, and it's a facsimile. It's a photographic facsimile. It's reduced in size, so it's not as big as the Norton was, but it's still a hefty volume, but you can still read it. But it has those. So an interesting story about this is that basically this was like, well, Doug Mawston, we were told he wanted to do this, and so he was told to get permission if he wanted to use one of the things about the Norton facsimile. And okay, just backtrack a little bit. Okay, the Norton facsimile, prepared by Carlton Hinman. This is a really an amazing piece of work, this volume, in terms of what Carlton Hinman did was that working at the Folger Library, which has the largest collection of folios in the world, he built a device, the Hinman collator, to compare different the pages of the folio to see where there were variations. Because one of the things that he discovered, I'm not sure if it was he discovered or other, is that there were variations, that some of the pages were being corrected while they were being done, and so they're pages where you have different versions of the text. It's not really significant things in terms of dealing with any kind of serious textual differences, but it's like, I think there's one example in Measure for Measure. Idle spider stings in one version has strings, so it's idle spider strings. And I mean, in either of those could work. So you can sort of and be aware that there was a variation there, because that was the way they would when they were printing it. They would still be proofing it, and then if they'd find things, they would correct it and have ones with the corrected pages. However, since paper was expensive and ink was expensive, the ones that they corrected that had been printed the wrong way, they used those as well. And they didn't care about really sort of keeping clean and dirty they just put them all together. You know, actually, when people would get the folio, it would be as just as pages, and they would have a binder who would bind it, because a lot of people would have, oh, we have this binder who does all of our books in this really nice leather binding, and it looks really good on our shelves because we know what he uses, our colors or whatever, something like that. I mean, that's how I mean, but that's one of the things about the folio. So this is so this was a really great resource to have, and from what I'd had from I got my copy because of I'd heard from Neil Freeman, and I wanted to have a folio to be able to check through all my speeches with that, and so, I mean, a lot of people in New York, I know there were a number of people because, as I say, Doug Mostyn had brought over Patrick Tucker, who was doing these readings, these classes, and about that people wanted to have folios. So anyway, so Doug Mostyn did that. He got the permission from Norton to use the numbers for a certain number of copies. And then what happened, once we got this book published and it was out there, Norton was like, wait a second, what are you doing? You can't publish that. That's we have the copyright on that. And it's like, well, it's the first folio. You don't really have a copyright on the first folio. Do you? But what they did have a point is they have a copyright on what Hinman had done. In addition to collating all of these things, he created this through line numbering, which are these numbers. You can't really see them here, but what he did basically was number. I mean, most modern editions number like by scene, and so then it's like 5. You have the 5s, the 10s, and as number of lines in the scene. What Hinman did was just to get a picture of the whole play. Is that it's just running through. It's through line numbering, so it's just counting all of the lines through that and setting it up in that way. So that was something, but that was something that then they could say, yes, we do have the copyright on these through line numberings. So if you published a facsimile of this without the through line, I mean, I don't know what they would do. Let's see. But Doug Mostyn had gotten permission from them. He was, I mean, because he wanted to, because he'd been bugging Norton for years to say, why can't you reprint this? And they're like, it's a very expensive book to reprint. We don't want to reprint it until we have the new version. And so he was like, well, all right, then let me print one. Can I get permission to have the through line numberings? And somebody at Norton gave him permission for that. And so for 3,000 copies. And then when Norton found out that we were doing this, they got very upset and said, "Oh, you can't do this because we've got the copyright on this, and you don't have permission to do the line numbers." And Doug Mostyn was like, "Yeah, you gave me permission." But then they were like, "Okay, well." With applause, our print run, we did one print run of this. It was 5,000 copies, even though we had permission for the 3,000 for the through line numberings. That was, we didn't even, when we were actually publishing it, we didn't even think that would be an issue because they'd been totally fine in giving the permission to use those through line numberings. But what ended up happening was, they worked out a deal where it's like, okay, we will not reprint this, and we will pay you a royalty on the extra 2,000 copies that we'd printed of the applause thing, and then it will go out of print. And so So it did, and because I worked on it, I've still got some copies of it, and it's a really it's a little more handy and easier to tote about than this one. But there've been many publications of first folios over the years. In addition to the Norton facsimile, there's also this one. Sorry, Mr. Shakespeare, Comedies, Histories, and Tragedies, a facsimile edition of the first folio, which was put out by Yale University Press, a facsimile edition, which also was like what a reduced size, as Applause had done, and this was very good. And Yale was able to publish their thing because their Elizabethan club had a copy of the first folio, and so this is a facsimile of that copy. So I mean, it's so that's one of the things that's really special about the Norton, is that Hinman had compared all these folios and came up with like the best version of every page. And this is from their version, which is I mean, still, it's a folio. It's great. And so there was that one, but then, you know, the fact that we couldn't publish this anymore, it led to a rather, I think it was at an ATHA convention one year, where Neil was there, and I saw him, and I told him how much his folio work meant to me, and that we'd publish this and all of that. And also our publisher, Glenn Young, talked to him, and because he was like, well, we want to bring out another folio, but the folio in modern type. And that was, I mean, and Neil was the right person to talk to, because he had put together his digital versions of the first folio for all of the plays. Patrick Tucker also had put together his version of things, and actually I think they still sell them, where he puts together packages for companies to use, where you get like the sort of the master script, and then you get all of the parts. I mean, set up as Q scripts, which is another aspect of original practices, which I could go into at some other point. But the folio. But because there is this interest, and because a lot of actors have found that it's like, wow, this works. I mean, because I know as an actor who is trained in Stanislavski work and all of this sort of thing, and I mean, Uta Hagen beats and sort of breaking things up and notating, knowing how to like highlight your text. When you're working with the folio and you've got the capitalization, it's like, this is Shakespeare highlighted the text for you, you know. So that's why I think it's able to work so effectively in the Instant Shakespeare Company, and why we still why it can really work. And so because of that, so they Neil had his versions that were available, and so what Glenn wanted to do was to have another folio to compete with the Norton one, but better in some way. And so first, one of the things we did was we published all of Neil's editions and this Applause First Folio edition, which also, as to showing that they're going to be working text, there's a blank page here for you to make notes on, and what Neil did in modern type was to fix up some of the typographical things that have changed over the years. That, for example, like when I showed you the BI and I said it's Ben Jonson, the I's look like J's, the V's look like U's, the U's look like V's, the S's sometimes look like F's, And so these are things that if you set it in modern type, that are confusing. So he would update. So we had updated them in that way, so that it's more accessible as well. And he also, one of the things that he did was, the footnotes on these are really incredible, where he gives you information on all of the sorts of variations, what editors have done, if there's something in a quarto, how a quarto differs, and those sorts of things. And so they're really they're quite remarkable. But it was all towards the end of bringing out this, the Applause First Folio of Shakespeare in modern type, prepared and annotated by Neil Freeman, supervised and produced for Applause by Paul Sugarman. And what this is it's every, we of course have the facsimile of the pages for the front matter, but then when you get into the plays, every page is set as it was in the folio, but in modern type, so you can read it. And there's also a lot of other, because it's Neil and because he wanted to make everybody know what the changes were, there's highlighting to show like when modern texts have changed the lineation in some way, and there's a extensive footnotes as well. And it really is, it's a master thing. Now, these individual scripts that he did were really very comprehensive in terms of all of the notes and such that are in there. And so it's really great. And it's a sort of a streamlined version of them are in here so that you're able to get this information on all of the plays. This is one of the things about these big books is sometimes they're difficult to get, and they're expensive for the publisher to reprint. And at this point, I'm not sure when they will be bringing it out. But bringing it out again, because it is available, supposedly it's available as an ebook, but I prefer the hard copies. So anyways, I've been talking a lot about the folio, and so with the Instant Shakespeare Company, when we started in 2000, it was when we were working on this volume, and I was like, well, hey, why don't we just see how this will work if we just give people, and for a lot of the things, what we did was we just gave them like pages of this first folio and this layout, and just read them. And so in 2000, we read the 36 plays in the first folio in 12 days. We did 3 readings a day. At that point, at that moment in time, I was a co-owner of the Applause bookstore, and so I could keep it open late if I wanted to, if I was there to do it. So we did readings at 3, 6, and 9, and we read all 36 of the plays in 12 days. It was really remarkable. It was just amazing to see how many people came out to do it. And we were really extraordinarily fortunate in that Jeffrey Owens, who I did not know at the time, he was teaching a Shakespeare class, and somebody found out about it, and he said he was willing to do it, and he did a whole bunch of them. He did Richard III, he did Othello, he did Prospero. It was great. I think I was the only person who was in all 36 of the readings because, hey, I was there, and so I had to do it. But we had some other people who did a lot of them. And after sort of the beginning, I really didn't have as much time to cast it. So if anybody showed up, then we'd give them stuff to do. And we did a few plays like Troilus and Cressida and Henry VIII with just 5 people each. But there were some readings where it was just really extraordinary. how well it worked. And I credit the what I've learned from Neil Freeman and the first Folio for that and why we keep doing it. And so, anyways, I've gone on for a while, probably rambled a bit too much. There's a lot of information to cover here. If you have any questions, please let me know. I try and do these things I try and have, it's in Shakespeare Company, is Shakespeare for everyone. And we do readings. We did readings that year. We did it at the Applause Bookstore. Then the Applause Bookstore got cut in half, and so there wasn't room to do them anymore, and I was out. And so then we found we did them at the public libraries. And then when the pandemic hit, we ended up doing them on Zoom. And so we do them on Zoom, and we will continue to do them on Zoom because it gives us an opportunity to connect with people all over the world and still have actually, Angus Hepburn was the very first actor who I called to cast when the first year I did it, and he's still an active member, but he lives in London now, so he mostly Zooms. Although when he was in New York last year, he was able to participate in our reading of The Tempest, and so we will continue on Zoom. We also will continue in the libraries. I haven't worked out the schedule for this year yet, but we're working on that, and we'll keep you updated. But one of the things that I want to do for Shakespeare for Everyone is to give an open forum where people have a chance to sort of share some Shakespeare, do something, ask for feedback if you want, or just a chance to just share something, or to do a speech. And so I try and do an open forum like once a month. It's usually the first Thursday of every month. I know this is actually the second Thursday, but we try and do that. And then we have other readings. In fact, next Thursday, we have a few readings scheduled. Next Thursday, we are doing Julius Caesar on March 16th at 7:30. And then the following 2 Thursdays, the 23rd and the 30th, we'll be doing the first part of Henry IV and the second part of Henry IV. We also on Zoom, we do our Shakespeare readings, but we also do other readings as well. Pretty much anything that is in the public domain, we can do. And if people want to do that, I want to do it. We've gotten into a sort of tradition of doing the Green Cockatoo on July 14th by Arthur Schnitzler, the Green Cockatoo by Arthur Schnitzler, which is set on Bastille Day. And so we've read that a few times on that, and we've done other readings as well. We did, we've done some readings of contemporary playwrights. We just recently did a reading of Mrs. Mustard by Kitty Chen, one of our members. That was a really terrific play, and it's a very, very good reading. And we've also done readings of Liz Estrada and of my father's plays, and we will be doing more of those. And so I'm open if people want to participate. If people just want to read, that's great. If people want to participate in terms of, well, I'd really like to put together a reading of this or that, we also welcome that as well, because I believe that Shakespeare and theater is for everyone, and that we need to give people a chance to explore their voices. And I think that working on Shakespeare has really gotten me in touch with the power of the voice, and also very much working at Shakespeare and Company really did that as well. Not only just working with Neil Freeman, who, as I say, it was only one little class that I had with him, but the training there was terrific. I was fortunate enough I got to study with Kristen Linklater, who is just a great voice teacher, and really and it's such a terrific Shakespeare and Company is has had so many great teachers there. Tina Packer, Dennis Krosnick, who's sadly gone, and Kevin Coleman, who is amazing. And there's a lot that you can get from Shakespeare. And my God, I've gone on for far too long. So I think I will end it here. We'll see if anybody can sit through all of this, but maybe we'll. But if you have any questions, next month we will do something on the first Thursday in April, and also around Shakespeare's birthday. We will have some other sort of celebration, of sort of Shakespeare open mic, where we really, because I really love people to share what Shakespeare they really love, because it really, there's a lot of different things that appeal to different people, and it's such a great diversity of it. And so I just want to say you'll be hearing more from me about the Folio. But well, stay safe and be well. Shakespeare for everyone.